With On Point, I'm Nompumelelo Siziba. A number of central banks are joining forces to develop a prototype platform for cross-border transactions using multiple central bank digital currencies, so-called CBDCs. The banks involved in this include the Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub, the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Monetary Authority of Singapore and the South African Reserve Bank. Well, to tell us more about this initiative and its implications if the experiment does take off, I'm joined by Deputy Governor Rashad Cassim. Thank you very much, Deputy Governor Cassim. Now, the initiative is called Project Dunbar. Just tell us a bit more about its purpose and the mechanics thereof.
Thank you, Nompu. As many of you will be aware, that CBDCs have become a buzzword in many central banks, and the SAB, like many other central banks, are involved in experimenting with CBDC. This is one leg of our CBD strategy, where we work with banks like the Bank of Singapore, Australia and Malaysia to look at an element of cross-border transactions, which many of you may be aware from your own experience is often very expensive, very difficult to understand, it's opaque and so on. So the idea is to get a few countries involved in trying to develop a common platform to assess whether one could improve on the nature and mode of cross-border digital transactions in a way that doesn't currently exist.
So ultimately, what will be the benefit of these cross-border digital currency settlement processes, especially, on the issue that you touched on around it being quite expensive usually to do these types of transactions?
So the benefit, Nompu, is that firstly, time. So you do a transaction, it takes a couple of days for it to clear on the other side. Secondly, costs. There are a number of opaque transaction costs to foreign currency exchanges and transmissional funds to another market, remittances in particular. Third is that you'll have a better sense of how it exactly the whole process works. Just more clarity, more transparency in what this happens. I should say we're a bit far away from that, but this is the main objective of Project Dunbar.
Yeah. So you say, of course, we're a bit far away from it, but would it effectively mean that intermediaries, for example, would be put out of business?
So, one has to put into context the whole central bank digital currency initiative that many central banks are embarking on. The idea of a digital currency is that we have physical cash. People use physical cash, whether it's domestically or whether it's through a platform between this country and another country. The idea about digital currency is that it's meant to be almost a digital version of cash. And it's really this digital version of cash is that what ultimately central banks are experimenting with. Now, why is it important here, coming back to your question? It's important because there's a recognition of the fact that a number of people don't have access to easy payments. You and I have credit cards, so we may not be a direct beneficiary of this kind of thing. Other people who don't have access to banking and so on may find this as a very, very useful thing. So that's the one benefit. The other, so we call it more or less financial inclusion. It's its ability to kind of include people. Now, it's a long way to, one has to kind of think very hard before one makes the claim that the introduction of central bank digital currency will be a threat to financial intermediaries. And by financial intermediaries, you're referring to banks and other sorts of foreign exchange providers and so on. I think that what this could ultimately do is create more kind of a more leaner financial system. It could create more competition. It could contribute to lower costs of payments and so on. That's really what it could do. I don't think we're at the stage where we ought to be worried about the total disruption of financial intermediaries. One must remember that the SAB is responsible for financial stability, and we have to make sure that any kind of initiative we introduce doesn't put the financial system at risk.
Yeah, indeed. Now, have you started to experiment with rolling out aspects of this thing to retail players? I mean, at what point do you anticipate that this will be introduced to the wider market for ordinary businesses and folk to be able to use?
So, several central banks are at different stages of this. Some have just begun research. Some have begun prototypes of experimenting with it, and some have run pilot projects. So, for example, the Bank of China has a pilot project where it actually has given an experiment to a number of consumers and retailers to actually experiment with the digital currency. Where we are at the moment is we have a prototype that we're developing. I guess in about 2 years we will determine whether we want to move to the next phase or not. In 2 years' time, we really will be doing a major evaluation to say we're not ready. We're going to rely on something else, such as the payment system, other than a digital currency, or we think that we really want to go all out to have a pilot and select a random bunch of households to kind of see how this thing could work. So that's really where we are. We are in the project prototype phase.
Deputy Governor Cassim, I have so much more to ask you, but not enough time. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. That was Rashad Cassim. He's the Deputy Governor at the Reserve Bank. I'll be back with more news for you at the top of the hour. Your weather details coming up next with Mdu.